Welcome to the new video of NeuroPhilos. Get ready to dive into a gripping tale that will leave you breathless, thinking, and inspired. Whether you're here for the mystery, the drama, or the unexpected twists, you're in the right place. Make sure to hit that like button, drop a comment, and subscribe so you never miss another powerful story. Let's begin *****, the forgotten game. People often say that human nature cannot change overnight. They argue that to ask someone to abandon their ego is to demand the impossible. After all, the ego seems to be the very foundation of our identity. The voice in our head that insists, "I am me, separate from the world, distinct from others." And yet, Alan Watts, with his gentle yet subversive clarity, told us that this ego, the very thing we cling to as the truest part of ourselves, does not exist in the way we imagine. The real trap is not the existence of the ego, but the belief in its permanence. If you try to dissolve the ego with the ego, if you use the very illusion you wish to transcend as your tool, you will find yourself running in circles, forever bound to an endless chase. Watts compared this to trying to bite your own teeth. You can attempt it forever, but you will never succeed, because you are using the wrong instrument for the wrong purpose. And so, the struggle becomes endless. People live entire lives locked in combat with themselves, trying to perfect or purify an identity that is itself a mirage. The ego is not a solid thing. It is a process, a performance, a mask worn so convincingly that the actor forgets it is a mask at all. But once forgotten, the game turns dangerous, for we become convinced that the stage is reality and that our costume is our skin. Every day, life throws us into this performance. The rushing schedules, the constant sense of falling behind, the gnawing suspicion that something essential is missing, all of it weighs on us like chains. We wake up with the feeling that we are already late for something undefined. We measure ourselves against invisible rulers, against people we imagine are ahead in the race. We tell ourselves that happiness is always waiting in the next milestone, the next achievement, the next purchase, the next relationship. And yet, when we arrive, the satisfaction dissolves and the chase begins again. This is the exhaustion of forgetting that life is a game. Watts reminds us that we are not simply bound in a prison of necessity, but immersed in a cosmic play. But who remembers, in the middle of suffering, that they are on stage? When you lose someone you love, when your heart is broken, when illness spreads through your body, when anxiety consumes your nights, who dares to think, yes, this too is part of the play? We resist it, fight it, curse it, as though suffering is a punishment, as though chaos is a failure. Yet Watts insists that the very things we despise, fear, loss, frustration, are woven into the script with purpose. Without darkness, light would lose its meaning. Without uncertainty, triumph would taste like nothing. Without grief, love would seem shallow. Life, in its fullness, demands contrast. But instead of accepting this, we resist, demanding that the play consist only of scenes we enjoy. That demand, however, is the very seed of suffering. Imagine, for a moment, watching a film where nothing bad ever happens. No conflict, no danger, no heartbreak. A story where every character is safe, every ending is happy, and nothing is ever at risk. At first, it might seem comforting, but soon it would bore you to tears. The thrill of a movie lies in its tension in not knowing whether the protagonist will survive, whether love will be found, whether the storm will pass. We pay to feel fear, sadness, joy, suspense, because on some level we know it is not real. It is safe. Watts proposes that life itself is exactly like this, but we have forgotten that it is safe. We are both the audience and the actors. We wrote the script, we chose the stage, and then we leapt so fully into the performance that we forgot our role. We forgot that fear was meant to be felt, not fought. We forgot that suffering was part of the drama, not a sign that something was wrong with us. And so we live as though each moment is final, as though every mistake damns us forever, as though every failure defines us completely. We forget the temporary, shifting nature of existence and cling desperately to permanence, even though permanence is impossible. We demand solidity from a world made of waves. We grasp at control in a universe built on change. But what if you remembered? What if, in the very moment of panic, you whispered to yourself, "This is part of the play. I chose this scene, even if I don't remember choosing it." The fear would not vanish, but its weight would shift. The pain would still hurt, but it would lose the sting of finality. For the first time, you would see yourself not as a victim of circumstance, but as a participant in a great, mysterious game. This is not an invitation to dismiss suffering as trivial. Watts never said that life is a joke or that pain should be ignored. On the contrary, he called it a sacred game where even suffering has its rightful place. To resist it is to miss the point, to turn away from the very experience you came here to have. Life is not about escaping pain. It is about recognizing it as part of the dance. Think about how children play. They willingly scare themselves with hide and seek, chase each other to exhaustion, wrestle, tumble, and even cry, only to rise again with laughter. They play because play is life in its rawest form, engaging fully with every sensation without demanding that it be permanent or safe. Somewhere along the way, as adults, we forget. We demand that life always be comfortable, predictable, under our control. But life refuses. Life remains a game, whether we recognize it or not. And here lies the paradox. We suffer most not from pain itself, but from the refusal to accept it. We suffer because we demand that the script exclude tragedy, that the play never include loss. We resist, and in resisting, we double the weight of what we feel. Pain is sharp, but resistance is endless. Anxiety stretches moments into eternities. Fear grows teeth only when we try to silence it. Alan Watts suggests that the true freedom lies not in controlling the play, but in remembering it. To awaken is not to escape the stage, but to recognize the costume for what it is. The ego is a mask. Suffering is a scene. Fear is a character written to test your depth. The moment you remember this, life shifts. The world does not change, but you begin to breathe differently, walk differently, see differently. You are no longer enslaved by the illusion of permanence. Life is not definitive, Watts whispers to us. It is improvisation. It is music unfolding, not a monument standing still. And when you remember that, you begin to play again, not desperately, not fearfully, but consciously, with awareness. That is the invitation of this forgotten game. To remember, in the midst of chaos, that you are both actor and audience. To stop fighting the script and instead deliver your lines with presence. To accept that the role of fear, of sadness, of frustration is not your punishment, but your part. And most of all, to awaken to the possibility that freedom lies not in winning the game, but in remembering that it was always a game. Metaphysical courage. When most people hear the word courage, they imagine soldiers charging into battle, firefighters running into burning buildings, or individuals standing up against injustice despite the threat of harm. Courage, in our cultural imagination, is almost always about facing something external, danger, violence, or overwhelming odds in the physical world. But Alan Watts introduced a different, subtler, and far more radical concept. Metaphysical courage. Metaphysical courage is not about raising a shield or wielding a sword. It is not about fighting an enemy outside yourself. Instead, it is about turning inward and facing the inner storms that most people spend their entire lives avoiding. It is about confronting fear, sadness, uncertainty, and loneliness directly without flinching, without distracting yourself, without trying to escape. This kind of courage requires no battlefield, no weapons, and no audience. It happens in the silent chambers of your own being. And because it lacks the drama of external bravery, it often goes unnoticed. Yet Watts believed it to be the most profound courage of all the courage to stop resisting what already is. From the time we are children, society trains us to resist uncomfortable feelings. If you are sad, someone tells you to cheer up. If you are afraid, you are advised to be brave and push it aside. If you are anxious, people suggest distractions. Keep busy, watch something, scroll endlessly, shop, eat, talk, anything, but stay still with the discomfort. On the surface, these coping mechanisms seem harmless. But Watts points out the irony. Every attempt to escape fear only makes it stronger. Think of fear like a shadow. If you run from it, it follows you endlessly. If you try to fight it, it grows darker and looms larger. But if you stop and turn to look at it, you realize it has no substance. It is just the absence of light. Metaphysical courage is precisely this turning to look. It is the willingness to face fear without immediately resisting, suppressing, or labeling it as wrong. Watts often gave the example of the samurai. In Japanese Zen, The warrior sought not just physical skill, but also the absolute presence of mind that would allow him to face death without trembling. The samurai studied meditation and detachment not merely to become more efficient killers, but to cultivate a state of being in which fear lost its grip. Beneath the raised sword, Watts explained, lies hell. But if you can pass through that hell, without resistance, without shrinking back, you arrive at what he called the land of bliss. This paradox reveals the essence of metaphysical courage. The way out of fear is not escape, but complete acceptance. The samurai did not eliminate fear by pretending it wasn't there. They did not distract themselves from the terror of mortality. Instead, they sat with it until fear dissolved into presence, until life and death were seen as two sides of the same coin. Watts challenges us to see our own fears in the same way. Whether the fear is of rejection, failure, loneliness, illness, or even death itself, the practice is the same. Stop resisting. Let fear be. Feel it as you would feel the heat of a flame on your skin, not as an enemy to be extinguished, but as a natural phenomenon. The difficulty, of course, lies in how deeply we have been conditioned. Modern culture equates control with safety. We are told that if we manage our lives perfectly, our careers, finances, relationships, and health, we can keep chaos at bay. Fear, then, becomes evidence of failure. If you are afraid, it must mean something is wrong with you. And so, instead of accepting fear, you fight it. You try to control it. You tell yourself you must become stronger, braver, more disciplined. But here is the paradox Watts insists on. The more you resist fear, the stronger it becomes. The more you fight sadness, the deeper it burrows. More you suppress loneliness, the more isolated you feel. It is like quicksand. Struggle intensifies the sinking. The way out is not resistance, but surrender. In acts so foreign to our conditioning that it feels impossible. And yet, it is precisely here that metaphysical courage is required. True courage, Watts says, is the willingness to remain present with what is unpleasant, to sit with anxiety without drowning in it, to allow grief to swell in your chest without rushing to numb it, to admit to yourself, I am afraid, and then let the fear exist without judgment. This is not weakness. It is not passivity. It is a kind of bravery so subtle that few even recognize it. For it takes far more strength to sit quietly in the fire of your own emotions than it does to fight enemies outside. Anyone can raise a sword in anger. Few can sit still while fear rises like smoke inside their lungs. Watts emphasized that when you stop resisting fear, it loses its teeth. It no longer has the power to define or dominate you. It becomes simply a sensation like heat, like cold, like hunger, something to be felt, not feared. In this shift, your relationship with fear transforms completely. Instead of being its prisoner, you become its witness. But why is this so difficult? Why do most people spend their lives running from fear instead of facing it? Watts believed The answer lies in identity. The ego, this fictional character we mistake for ourselves, depends on the illusion of control. It wants to be the author of every moment, the master of every outcome. Fear threatens that illusion. To accept fear is to admit that control is partial, that life cannot be scripted according to our desires. And the ego hates this truth. That is why the ego resists metaphysical courage with all its strength. It insists that if you surrender to fear, you will be destroyed. It whispers that you must stay busy, keep worrying, keep controlling, keep fighting. Anything but stop and feel. And so, people remain trapped in endless cycles of resistance, exhausted, anxious, restless, unable to realize that the cage exists. Only in their minds. Yet Watts offers hope. The moment you stop resisting, everything changes. Fear does not vanish, but it shrinks to its true size. Pain still arises, but it no longer controls you. You discover a strange and unexpected freedom, the freedom to feel fully, without being crushed. The ego loosens its grip, and for the first time, you taste the possibility of living without constant internal battle. Metaphysical courage, then, is not about becoming fearless. It is about becoming free. Free, not because fear has left you, but because you no longer need it to leave. Free, not because life has become easy, but because you have learned to move with it instead of against it. Imagine this, in practice. You wake in the middle of the night, heart pounding with anxiety about tomorrow. Instead of immediately trying to fix it by planning, distracting, or suppressing you, simply sit with it. You breathe into the fear, acknowledging its presence like an old companion. You don't demand it, go away. You don't make it your enemy. You let it rise, let it fall, let it move through you like a storm through the sky. And in that act of acceptance, the fear begins to shift. It is no longer a monster in the dark. It is a passing weather pattern. This, Watts would say, is the beginning of awakening. Not escape, not conquest, but acceptance. Metaphysical courage is the foundation for everything that follows. Without it, you remain at war with yourself, forever caught in resistance. With it, you open the door to a deeper way of living, one where emotions no longer enslave you, where the play of life can unfold without you constantly trying to rewrite the script. This is not easy. It is, in fact, the most difficult thing in the world because it requires you to go against everything you were taught. But it is also the most liberating because once you taste this freedom, nothing can ever enslave you again. Watts calls us, then, not to be soldiers on the battlefield, but to be warriors of the soul, to practice a bravery that does not shout or fight, but simply says, I will not run from myself. And that is metaphysical courage, the quiet, profound bravery of letting life be exactly as it is. The onion of worry, anxiety, Alan Watts suggested, is like peeling an onion with infinite layers. You peel one away, believing you are finally close to peace, and immediately another appears. You worry about money. Once that seems stable, you begin worrying about your health. When your health is fine, your mind drifts to the future, to relationships, to reputation, to mortality. The process is endless. Layer after layer, problem after problem, your mind convinces you that peace lies just beneath the next skin. But every time you reach for it, you find another layer waiting. This is the structure of worry, a self-perpetuating cycle that convinces us we are being responsible while secretly enslaving us. Watts called it a trap of the mind, a pattern where the habit of worrying becomes so ingrained that even when no real problem exists, the mind manufactures one to keep itself occupied. Peace is always almost here, but never fully arrived. Why do we do this to ourselves? Why do we live in a constant state of emergency, even when there is no threat? Watts believed it came from a deep-seated cultural conditioning. From childhood, we are taught that to worry is to care. A parent who doesn't worry about their child seems irresponsible. An employee who doesn't worry about work is labeled lazy. A person who doesn't worry about the future is accused of being naive. In this way, worry is rewarded and praised, while peace is often mistaken for negligence. And so, without realizing it, we adopt worry as an identity. We equate it with responsibility. We tell ourselves, if I stop worrying, I'll miss something important. Something will go wrong. We believe worry is an invisible amulet protecting us from catastrophe. But as Watts pointed out, this is the greatest illusion of all. Worry protects nothing. It changes nothing. All it does is distort our perception, magnify our fears, and bind us in endless layers of anxiety. Consider how the mind operates when it is anxious. A small issue, perhaps an unexpected bill appears. Instead of simply solving it, the mind spins stories. What if this keeps happening? What if I can't pay next month? What if I lose my job? What if I end up homeless? The imagination leaps far beyond the reality of the moment, painting catastrophic pictures of futures that almost never arrive. A single worry mutates into dozens, each more terrifying than the last dot. This is the onion. You peel one layer, and the next is already waiting. And because the mind is so good at weaving narratives, you feel as though you are being realistic. But what Watts reveals is that worry is not realism, it is addiction. The anxious mind does not want peace. It seeks stimulation, control, movement. It prefers an endless game of problem-solving to the terrifying silence of having no problems at all. Here is where the trap deepens. When life does give you a break, when everything is going smoothly, the anxious mind feels restless. Instead of enjoying peace, it grows suspicious. Something must be wrong. If it's too quiet, disaster must be around the corner. So it invents a new problem. Perhaps you've noticed this in yourself, lying awake at night, safe and comfortable, but unable to stop your mind from conjuring new worries out of thin air. This is not because the world is dangerous, but because the mind has become addicted to the tension of danger. Watts compared this addiction to an itch. You scratch because it brings temporary relief, but scratching only makes the itch worse. The more you scratch, the more you need to scratch. In the same way, the more you worry, the more problems your mind generates, convincing you that worry is essential. The cycle sustains itself, trapping you in an endless spiral of anxiety. But if the onion of worry has infinite layers, how do you escape? Watts's answer is deceptively simple. You stop peeling. You stop believing that peace is on the other side of the next worry. You stop chasing the illusion that if you solve just one more problem, you will finally be safe. Instead, you learn to sit with the onion as it is. You allow the worries to arise without immediately reacting to them. You see them for what they are, stories, not truths. This does not mean you ignore responsibilities. If you have a bill to pay, you pay it. If you have a deadline, you meet it. But you do so without layering the experience with catastrophic narratives about the future. You stop feeding the cycle. You handle reality as it comes, one moment at a time, instead of constructing endless layers of imagined emergencies. Watts often spoke about the difference between living in reality and living in the imagination of fear. Reality is simple. It presents you with one situation at a time. Imagination, on the other hand, multiplies every challenge into a dozen more. Reality says, you owe this bill. Imagination says, you might lose your house. You might lose your health. You might lose your future. Reality is finite. Worry is infinite. To break free, you must cultivate a new relationship with uncertainty. Most worry comes from the belief that if you can think enough, you can predict and control the future. But the future is inherently uncertain. No amount of worry will ever change that. The courage, then, is not in eliminating uncertainty, but in accepting it. Imagine standing before a vast, dark ocean. The anxious mind wants to measure it, control it, build walls against its waves. But Watts encourages us instead to marvel at it, to stand before the unknown and say, yes, it is vast. Yes, it is uncertain. And yes, I will enter anyway. The ocean of life cannot be controlled, but it can be experienced. And when you stop resisting its vastness, something unexpected happens. You discover you can float. This shift from control to contemplation is the key. Instead of fighting uncertainty, you begin to see it as the very stage on which life unfolds. Instead of resisting worry, you observe it, almost as if it were a character in a play, loud, dramatic, but not ultimately real. You realize that worry is not a sign of responsibility, but a distraction from presence. And the moment you see this clearly, the onion loses its grip. But awareness alone is not enough. This insight must be practiced daily in the small moments. The next time you catch your mind spinning stories late at night, pause. Instead of asking, what if this goes wrong? Ask yourself, what is true right now? Right now, you are lying in bed. Right now, you are breathing. Right now, you are safe. The imagined catastrophes are not here. They exist only in thought. By returning to the present moment, you stop peeling the onion. You stop feeding the endless cycle. This practice is not easy. The habit of worry runs deep, and the mind will resist letting go. But with each moment of awareness, with each act of choosing presence over panic, the cycle weakens. Slowly, you begin to taste the possibility of living without constant tension. Not because life has become problem-free, but because you have learned to distinguish between reality and imagination. Watts's teaching on the onion of worry is not meant to dismiss anxiety, but to liberate us from its tyranny. He reminds us that life will always contain challenges, but it does not have to contain endless worry. The mind's addiction to anxiety can be broken, not through resistance, but through awareness. And when you finally stop peeling, when you stop searching for peace in the next layer, something extraordinary happens. Peace is revealed not as a future prize, but as a present reality. It was never hidden beneath the onion. It was always here, waiting for you to stop searching. That is the lesson of the onion of worry, that the layers were never the problem. The problem was believing that freedom lay beyond them, instead of within the simple act of being present. The greatest illusion of all the tricks the human mind plays upon itself. Alan Watts suggested that perhaps the most subtle and the most destructive is the belief that worrying is a form of responsibility. On the surface, it sounds noble. You worry because you care. You worry about your family, your future, your health, your work. You tell yourself that to stop worrying would be reckless, even dangerous. Surely, if you let your guard down, disaster would strike. And so, like millions of others, you clutch your anxieties as though they were talismans warding off chaos. The restless mind convinces you that sleepless nights and tense shoulders are proof of vigilance, that fear is a kind of insurance policy against tragedy. This is the illusion Watts warned us about. For the truth, as he explained with piercing clarity, is that worry is not protection, it is imprisonment. Imagine watching a storm roll across the sky. Lightning cracks, thunder shakes the air, rain clashes the earth. Do you believe that your worrying can stop the storm? Of course not. You watch. You may take shelter. You may admire the power. But you do not imagine that your anxious thoughts can control the clouds. And yet, when it comes to the storms of our inner world, we believe exactly that. We think that by worrying about the future, we can somehow shape it, bend it to our will, prevent catastrophe. Watts reminds us this is a profound misunderstanding. Worrying does not stop the lightning. It only blinds us to the beauty of its flash. It does not stop the rain. It only prevents us from hearing its rhythm. Worry robs us of the present while promising a control it can never deliver. This is why Coates described life as something not to be controlled, but to be contemplated. Control is the ego's obsession, the idea that if you plan enough, calculate enough, anticipate enough, you can tame the wildness of existence. But contemplation asks something entirely different of you. It asks you to open your eyes to life, exactly as it is, without attempting to fix, grasp, or manipulate it. When you see lightning in the sky, you do not rush to extinguish it, to simply behold it. When you hear thunder, you do not argue with it, to allow it to echo. Similarly, when fear arises in your chest, when sadness pools in your heart, when anger ignites in your mind, the task is not to suppress or to control, but to witness. Watts called this a radical reprogramming of the mind. Instead of treating emotions as problems, you begin to treat them as phenomenal, like the wind, like the tide, like the flame. They are not flaws to be corrected, but expressions of life itself. This shift, however, is not easy. You have spent your entire life being told the opposite. From childhood, the message is drilled in. Control yourself. Be strong. Don't let fear show. Don't cry. Don't be weak. Society trains you to resist your emotions, to view them as signs of failure. By the time you reach adulthood, you are armored against your self-hiding sadness, denying fear, disguising loneliness. But the armor comes at a cost. Suppressed emotions do not disappear, they fester. Repressed fear mutates into anxiety. Buried grief hardens into numbness. Ignored anger erupts later in violence or self-loathing. The very act of resisting emotions transforms them into monsters. And so, the illusion deepens. You believe you must control them even more. The harder you try to dominate life, the more it slips from your grasp. Watts saw this clearly. He explained that existence is not a war to be won, but a play to be performed. It is not a fortress to be defended, but a river to be flowed with. The more you resist the river, the more exhausted you become. But the moment you surrender, the water carries you. To illustrate this, Watts often used music as a metaphor. Nobody listens to a symphony hoping it will end quickly. You don't attend a concert just to hear the final note. The value of music is in the playing, in the unfolding of melody and rhythm through time. Life, he argued, is the same. It is not a race toward some grand finale. It is a dance of moments, meant to be lived, not controlled. Worry, then, is like trying to hold on to every note of the song, as though clutching them will keep the music from ending. But clenching ruins the melody. Life's beauty is revealed only when you allow the notes to come and go, to rise and fall, to be born and to vanish. Worry, by contrast, makes you deaf to the music. But here is the most difficult part. Knowing this intellectually is not enough. You cannot simply say to yourself, I won't worry anymore, and expect to be free. The illusion runs too deep. It is not an idea in your head. It is a habit in your body. Every muscle is trained to tense in fear. Every thought is conditioned to leap toward control. Breaking this cycle requires more than thought. It requires practice. It begins in the smallest moments. The next time you feel fear rising, resist the urge to resist. Instead of pushing it away, breathe into it. The pounding of your heart, the quickening of your breath, the tightening of your stomach. Witness it as you would watch the waves crash against a shore. Don't interpret it, don't analyze it, just observe. The moment you stop fighting, something shifts. The fear is still there, but it no longer owns you. Becomes a passing weather. Pattern, not a permanent prison. Do the same with sadness. Instead of labeling it as weakness or failure, allow it to unfold. Let the tears come if they must. Observe the heaviness in your chest as you would observe a storm cloud drifting by. But the sadness, like the fear, will not destroy you. It is part of the palette of human experience, as necessary as joy. Watts taught that true freedom does not mean the absence of difficult emotions. A true freedom means the ability to feel them fully without being enslaved by them. It is the realization that fear, sadness, and anger are not enemies, but teachers. They are not barriers to life. They are part of life. The only real prison is resistance, the endless struggle to reshape reality into something safer, calmer, more controlled. And when you finally stop resisting, when you allow emotions to flow as naturally as breath, you discover something extraordinary. A quiet strength, a calm beneath the storm. It is not the calm of control, but the calm of surrender, the calm that comes when you no longer need life to be other than what it is. This is the breaking of the greatest illusion, the realization that worry was never responsibility. It was never protection. It was always a distortion, a trick of the ego trying to maintain control over the uncontrollable. Responsibility is not measured by how much you worry, but by how present you are in each moment. A worried parent is not more loving than a calm parent. An anxious worker is not more productive than a steady one. In fact, worry clouds judgment, exhausts energy, and blinds you to the very solutions that presence reveals. To live without the illusion of control is to live awake. To see worry for what it is, a shadow, not a shield, is to step into a new way of being. Life does not need your worry. It needs your presence. Existence does not demand your resistance. It invites your participation, and so Watts's invitation is clear. Stop mistaking worry for responsibility. Stop treating fear as failure. Stop believing that life must be conquered before it can be lived. Let existence be as it is, wild, unpredictable, untamable, and discover the freedom that has been hidden all along in the simple act of being. Awakening on the stage. Life does not pause. Whether you meditate for hours each day, read all the books of wisdom, or train your mind in every practice, existence continues to flow. Storms still come, losses still arrive, joys still surprise you. The river of time does not stop because you have awakened. It continues endlessly with waves of joy and grief, light and darkness, laughter and silence. Alan Watts reminds us that the purpose of awakening is not to escape the stage, but to remember that it is a stage. Most people live as though life is a courtroom. Every mistake is judged, every failure is a sentence, every loss a final verdict. They believe someone is keeping score, measuring worth, tallying achievements. But Watts offered a startlingly different image. Life is not a courtroom, but a theater. It is a play, a cosmic performance in which each of us has been given a role. The tragedy is not that the play contains sorrow and chaos. The tragedy is that we forget it is a play at all. Think about it. When you watch a play, you don't expect the characters to be happy all the time. You don't demand that the story avoid conflict or pain. Without those elements, the drama would be flat, the story meaningless. The value of the performance is in its tension, its contrast, its rise and fall. In the same way, your life contains scenes of suffering, not because you are cursed or broken, but because that is what gives the story depth. The difference between suffering unconsciously and suffering consciously lies in awareness. When you forget you are on stage, fear and pain become overwhelming. They define you. They seem permanent. But when you awaken, you see them as part of the script. They still hurt, but they lose their power to imprison. You suffer. But you also understand this too is part of the play. Watts used to say, "You do not need to win at life because there is nothing to win." There is no trophy waiting at the end, no grand judge in the wings grading your performance. The only purpose is to live the role as fully as possible, to laugh when laughter comes, to weep when tears fall, to love when love arises, and to let go when the curtain closes. The ego, of course, resists this. The ego demands meaning in the form of victory. It wants the security of knowing the ending, the reassurance that if it plays well enough, it will be rewarded. But awakening shows us the deeper truth. The reward is the play itself. The gift is the experience of being alive. When you stop chasing a finish line that doesn't exist, you discover the richness of every scene, even the painful ones. To awaken, then, is to shift your relationship with life. Instead of being a puppet pulled by fear and anxiety, you become a conscious participant. You still feel the pull of sorrow, the sting of loss, the pang of fear, but you see them in context. They are no longer endless tragedies, but fleeting acts in a larger performance. Think of rain. Someone trapped in resistance, rain feels like an interruption, an inconvenience, a problem to be solved. But to someone awake, rain is part of the song of existence. You feel it.
Okay.
Step into it, letting the drops run across your skin.
Okay.
You accept its coldness as part of the world's rhythm. In the same way, awakening transforms fear, pain, and chaos. They stop being enemies to be fought and become elements of the greater dance. Metaphysical courage, the heart of Watts's teaching, is what makes this awakening possible. It takes courage to surrender to the stage. It takes courage to admit that you are not in control, that the script contains suffering, that your role is temporary. Most people run from this truth, building walls of worry and distraction to protect themselves from the rawness of life. But those walls become prisons. True liberation comes only when you step onto the stage without armor, willing to feel everything. This does not mean passivity. It does not mean you sit back and do nothing while life unfolds. On the contrary, awakening allows you to engage more fully. When you stop resisting fear, you gain the energy to act with clarity. When you stop drowning in worry, you can respond to challenges with presence. Instead of being consumed by the illusion of control, you learn to flow with reality as it is. Picture yourself as an actor. If you are too self-conscious, worried about forgetting lines, terrified of judgment, you falter. You lose the natural flow of the scene. But if you relax into the role, if you allow yourself to feel and to respond in the moment, the performance comes alive. Life is no different. The more you resist the role you've been given, the more artificial and exhausting it feels. But the moment you surrender, you discover a freedom in the very act of playing. Watts believed that awakening is not about abandoning the ego entirely, but about recognizing it as a mask. You can wear the mask for the play, but you no longer mistake it for your face. You can inhabit the role deeply, but you no longer forget that it is a role. With this awareness, even suffering becomes part of the artistry. You do not need to pretend it doesn't hurt. You allow the hurt to be real yet. You also know it is not the final truth of who you are. When you live this way, something extraordinary shifts. Pain still comes, but it no longer paralyzes you. Fear still rises, but it no longer defines you. The ego still whispers, but you see it for what it is. A character in the drama, not the author of the play. And in that moment of clarity, you awaken not by changing the script, but by remembering that you chose to step onto this stage in the first place. Awakening does not mean escaping life's challenges. It means embracing them with awareness. It means walking through sorrow with open eyes, dancing in joy without clinging to it, meeting fear without running away. It means saying, in every scene, I accept. I am here. I feel everything. Alan Watts often described this as a spiritual rebellion. In a culture that teaches us to flee from pain at all costs, to numb ourselves, to build walls of control, to pretend we are invulnerable, awakening is an act of defiance. To feel everything without resistance, to accept fear and pain as part of the sacred dance, is to reclaim your freedom from a society built on distraction. And so, the invitation of awakening is not to seek victory or escape, but to remember. To remember that you are both actor and audience. To remember that the purpose is not to win, but to play. To remember that every tear, every laugh, every scream is part of a cosmic performance unfolding in perfect rhythm. When the curtain falls, when your role ends, there will be no judge waiting backstage with a scorecard. There will be no tally of how well you resisted, how much you worried, how strongly you clung to control. There will only be the memory of how deeply you played your part, how fully you lived the story given to you. And so, Watts leaves us with this truth: you are free, not because the stage is easy, but because you remember it is a stage. You are liberated, not because fear is gone, but because you no longer fear fear itself. You are awakened, not because the play has ended, but because you finally see it for what it is, a divine game, a sacred dance, a song without conclusion. Life will go on, the river will flow, the curtain will rise again and again. But when you awaken, you no longer resist. You step into the light, take your place on the stage, and with metaphysical courage, whisper, I accept. I am here. I feel everything. And that is awakening on the stage.